In this video, we're gonna continue to talk about rendering in 3ds Max. And we saw in the previous video how we can create a really fast and simple rendering using the IBL technique or image baselining and using HDRI or environment texture. Now you can see that with this really simple technique, we can have a nice background, a realistic background, which we don't have to create. We don't have to create the scene, it's just a single image. And then we have reflections for our reflective materials. So everything is going to be more realistic because it's going to be reflecting what's in the surroundings instead of like a simple color or a simple background. So everything will be really realistic in a really fast and simple fashion. So this is the first technique and the first type of rendering that we are gonna see here, that we already saw actually. And in this video, we're gonna talk about exterior renderings. Now you of course create exterior renderings also with HDRI and image baselining. You just need to select background or an HDRI image, which is gonna be representing an exterior or outdoor environment, like something that can be a night scene or a day scene or a sunset, whatever. So by just applying the HDRI, we can have the exterior lining. And we also saw that we have interior setups here. So we're gonna see also interior rendering later. And we also saw where we can get some learning scenes. So these are really helpful scenes that you can use to study many of the different effects that you can apply, whether you are on a single subject rendering or you are in an interior rendering or exterior rendering. So you can use these sample files to test and study different effects and techniques and tools that we're gonna also see in this part of the video course. So I'm gonna continue here and I'm gonna just select a scene that I want to use in the exterior. And we can see also that in the sample files, we can find a kind of architectural model like city, concept city. We can use this to make a first test with the first tools that we're gonna see, which are the sun and the sky system, which can help us to create sun and sky. Now, when you import something that is not already set up for Arnold renderer, it's gonna ask you to convert the scene. So this is another really handy tool, which is called the scene converter, and can help you to convert anything into Arnold materials, lights, and anything that is possible, like render settings and so on. So anytime you bring in a scene with a previous version of 3ds Max, or let's say with another render, it's going to ask you if you want to convert. And this is showing you what it's going to convert. It's going to convert Arcane Design materials, physical sky, mental ray sun, mental ray sky. These are all old-fashioned, let's say, from the previous version of 3ds Max. So you can use this, and this is going to automatically convert everything. Now, also, if you're using like Corona or V-Ray, which are other render engine, you can try to convert everything with to be used in Arnold. Now, if you're interested in the channel, you will find also courses in V-Ray for 3ds Max and Corona for 3ds Max, which are two really popular and powerful render engine out there if you want to work with those. Here, we're going to just proceed with Arnold. So first of all, I only have one view here, so I need to change the layout from the customize panel of the viewports. I want to switch to the 4 views layout, which we are using since the beginning of our course. And there you go. So we have here these buildings, and already we have a daylight system set up. A daylight system is the combination of a sun and a sky. Now everything looks too bright, so probably we need to adjust the exposure. So remember that every time that you see some scene that's too black or too white, the issues could be probably two. So usually there are two main issues. The first one is going to be the intensity of the light. The second is going to be could be the exposure. So you can see here I also have a camera, and I can just go inside that camera just by selecting it into the views. And we're also going to talk about cameras more in this video and also in the following videos. So here you can see I can change the position of the camera, and right now I'm just looking through that camera. So I can also activate the show save frame to see what the render will be. So don't be deceived by the viewport, because the render could be something else. So if you want to see how the render is going to come out, you should activate the save frames. That's the settings that you can set up in the render settings in the common panel. And we're going to see those later on as well. So also here, I want to switch to the wireframe in the other views so I can see better the whole scene. And you can just zoom, extend to zoom all the scene. Now, these are all tools that we introduced earlier in the course. So I'm just going fast because we already know all of these tools and commands. We saw that in the first part of the course. And if I render, you can see this is the resolution of the render. This is the height and the width. So this is kind of a customized format. So you can use standard formats, or you can use customized formats if you want. And to change the format, you need to go into the render setup. And we can already see that it looks fine. So it doesn't look good in the viewport, but it looks fine in the rendering. So if you go to the system, that's the daylight system right there. This is where you can create a daylight system. And a daylight system is essentially a combination of sky and sun. And it's really handy because you can set up the hours, the minutes, so by the time, the day, the month, and you can also use a precise location. You can get a location. So if you want, for example, Rome, you can go in Europe here and select all the main cities. In this case, I want to have Rome, and I can get the latitude and the longitude, or I can just insert latitude and longitude if I want. So this is going to create a perfect simulation of that particular exterior in that particular place in that particular time. So we're going to also see the daylight system again, or the sky and the sun and the sky. This is the first thing you can do when you do exterior renderings. And now I'm taking the scene that we have developing during the course, and we're gonna use this to create the daylight scene. Now, if you remember, I created two Arnold lights here. One was a sky and the other was a distant Arnold light. So those two can simulate perfectly the sun and the sky. And also I want to show you some other tools that can be helpful when you need to do exterior renderings, like for example, if you want, here you have the possibility to create freehand splines like that. So I want to show you that with these freehand splines, you can create like a terrain with another tool, or you can either like import a CAD file containing these are called level curves, and they're used to represent terrains. So the various height of the terrains. So each curve represents a different height of the terrain. So as in Skyline, I am creating here some hills and some mountains. So you can see I've created with the splines, with the freehand splines, some of these curves, but again, you can import them using like Google Maps also and SketchUp. You will find also a video guide in the channel of how you can create these curves using SketchUp and Google Maps. Just search it, and if you don't find it, just write your questions in the comments, ask for assistance. We're gonna try to guide you inside these different tools to the best solution for you. So whether you're doing like landscape design or terrain modeling using a CAD file, there are different solutions. Now, this is probably one that can help you in that situation, again, when you have curves already done. But this is just to show you how it's gonna work. So basically, you have different curves in different heights, different levels, and you select all the curves that you want to use and just turn them into a terrain by using a compound objects, which is called terrain. So it's gonna automatically create this topper surface. Now you need to fix it and adjust it a little bit, but it's there. So depending also how many curves you're gonna add and how many details you're gonna add, you're gonna have different results. And you can make it look like a layered solid kind of a, again, like architectural model more than a realistic look, or you can have it more smooth and more organic. So depending on how you change all these parameters, you can always go back to the contours, terrain, you can show both. And there are also other really interesting features like coloring the different heights with different colors. So you can just create a default and you can see that it's going to change the color according to the height. But this is just an example. Again, for all these advanced tools, just go in the manual, check the manual. We're going to find a lot of really interesting tips and tricks. Now you can see if I push up that curve is gonna also push up the landscape. So I'm kind of creating a really high mountains there. So it's really, I think it's really helpful again when you need to create terrains. And like this is my house there in the valley. And so you either use a fake background like we did with HDRI, or you actually create your scene really in a specific way, creating the landscape. Now, if you're interested in landscape design, landscape creation, and also in rendering and animation, you should check also Lumion or Twinmotion or Unreal Engine. Those are all good alternatives to create landscapes. And again, you will find the courses in the channel. Now I applied also a turbo smooth here, and I want to switch to the compact material editor now to continue also to talk about materials. And I'm trying to find here the grass material so that you can just apply that, and that's it. So you can apply the grass, you can apply vegetation. Now we also saw how we can paint onto an object using the 2D painting tools, and also the RM4 to create grass. But another way we can scatter things on the surface, well, you have this also the compound objects, the scatter tools, but also you can paint out things using the 3D painting. So you can see here in the compound objects, you have the scatter, which we already used. So you can scatter the tree around the surface that you want. So you have an object, we now need to pick the distribution object, which is going to be our terrain here, our little terrain, and then just increase the duplicates. And then you can change if you want the duplicates to be in a really order fashion, or if you want them like randomized, scattered all around. So you just go down and you see here you have many parameters to distribute the trees or whatever you want to distribute in different ways. Now you can do this with vegetation, you can do this with rocks, you can do this with any particular element that you want to multiply in your terrain to make it look more realistic. And also again, you have the paint. So you can do paint with selected objects. So you can choose an object, select an object. Once you select it, you can just go there and paint out that object around. So again, you're gonna multiply that object real quick. So be careful, because you can get stuck if you have a really large terrain like the one that you saw before. So start with small terrains and then continue. And again, you have all parameters there you can change and fix and adjust to have different results. Now, again, if you want to do some really large scene, and Unreal Engine has a beautiful way you can paint out and create landscapes, but also Lumion, it's an excellent tool, and Twinmotion, which is like the simpler version of Unreal Engine, and it is specific for creating really complex outdoor scenes and exteriors. So these are definitely good software you may want to have a look at. Right here in 3ds Max, I think, well, my opinion, it's really good to create models and scenes. But then if I need to create more complex situations, more complex worlds, I will probably go into Twinmotion, Lumion, or Unreal Engine, or similar. Or like another one is Enscape. And again, there are many options and solutions. So right now I'm placing the Arnold light, and the first one is going to be a distant light. Now the distant light is going to simulate the sun, so don't matter where you place it, matters how you rotate it. So differently from like a spotlight or an omni-light, there are some types of lights that doesn't matter where you place it. So I'm trying to here see the effect of the sun. So when you see checkerboards there, it's just the engine calculating textures. So you just need to wait, especially if there are high quality texture or really complex materials, then you need to wait every time you to upload those. So just have patience, they're gonna appear. There you go. And especially if you have a lot of objects, if you have a lot of trees and doors and chairs and people and models, and there you go. Now we can start to see the distant light, so the sunlight. Now you can use sunlight and sky for exteriors, but also for interiors. So we're gonna see that also again later. So I apply a physical sky onto the environment. That's a way you can use the physical sky. And you also need to connect the physical sky with the um, sun. So they connected, they work together. So when you change the position of the sun, it is also going to change the position of the sky. Well, more the position, the colors, and the gradient, because the physical sky is nothing but a procedural map creating a gradient. So if I click and drag there in the slate material editor, I can see the parameters of that uh, map, of that procedural map, and you can see it works here with some of these parameters like the sun tint, the sun, and it's using the color foreground, albedo, and well, this is one way we can create our physical sky. Now you also have the physical sun and sky environment, which is a little bit more complex, and just click on create, and this is going to create a sun positioner, which is another tool to work with the sun and the sky again, like in combination. So remember that also we need to switch from the standard environment sky. So I'm gonna get rid of that map from the environment and replace it with the other one. So this is the sun and sky positioner right here, which is similar to the daylight system because it's gonna add again a sun and a sky, and I can position there the sun using whether the manual movement or position. So I can move it around, or I can, and it's also, you can see there now, important to place it in the height. So the Z position is really important, not only the X and the epsilon. And we can start to see some effects by just changing the position, moving the sun around. And we also have some indications about the north, the west, the east, and the south. And again, we can choose the daytime allocation, or we can place this manually, just like the daylight system. So this is kind of the evolution of daylight system that we used before. And so let's go now into the full shading, and let's also run render to see how it's gonna look like. If it's too bright, again, we need to decrease the intensity or change the exposure. Now you can see, yeah, it's too bright, so this won't work. And I tell you why it's too bright, because I think that the system is set up for interiors rather than exteriors. So we need to fix that using a camera. When you use a physical camera, you can adjust the exposure, or you can just adjust the exposure with the environmental effects tab. Now let's go back to the physical and sun and sky environment. So with just decreasing the intensity here to 0.1, we can see just better, but it's still too bright, because you can see the background looks white, the sky looks white, the swimming pool looks white. So it means there is too much light. We are starting to see the architecture, so this is a good sign, but it's still too intense. So we need to decrease that more. Let's bring it to 0.04, and I think even more. Yeah, you can see that. Now I can start to see the sky in the background, and also the light coming from the sun. So again, when you change the position of the sun, it's gonna affect the colors of the sky. Now 0, of course, is to create a pitch black scene, so total night. So if we just, let's say 0.001, again, this is really dark, but it's not looking so bad. Now it depends on where the sun is. You can see the sun is really near the horizon, so that if I push that sun up, you can see I start to see a more bluish color. So the more you're gonna go near the horizon, and the more it's gonna be orangish or yellowish, the more I'm gonna push it up, it's gonna look more intense and bluish, like a clear sky. So we can set up the lighting from here. So let's say 0.01 is looking good. So this is probably the effect that I'm looking for. Now, when I set up the intensity, then I just need to change the position of the sun, and that's it. So I just need to figure out which intensity works the best. And remember, you need to see the sky in the background. You need to see, in this case, your model, and nothing should look total white except for maybe some specular reflection on a metal. You can see there on the railings we have those really bright points. Well, that's fine, because that's a really reflective material, but try to avoid white spots, because they could cause problems in the rendering. So we can see now that we are setting up our lighting. So once we created our exterior scene, we can proceed to the final render by addressing first of all the lighting, the natural light. We can also add artificial lights, but most of the time this is going to be just enough. Now what I'm trying to do here is trying to show you the sun, because when you use the procedural sky, so the sun and sky systems, you actually will see the sun. There you go. So you just need to place it in the correct position, and you can see it. You can see it also reflected in the swimming pool. So it's a really beautiful effect. Now I don't really like this really yellow look. I would probably prefer something more, yeah, something more orangish. And you can see I've changed the haze parameter. So you have other parameters that can help you to create other effects. Just go into the physical sun and sky environment map and just change those parameters. For example, you can change the disk intensity of the sun, the glow intensity, so you can make it look more glowing. So you can see how it's gonna be more realistic like this. And also change the disk size. So how big the sun will be in the background. So it's actually appearing there in the background. You can manage the sun position and the sun look using these parameters. So this is again the beauty of procedural maps. When you use HDRI, you cannot do this. You can just rotate the image, and the image is going to get the sun from the pixels, from where the sun is in the picture. Here you have more freedom to customize, for example, also the ground. I can make like a brown ground, or I can make a green ground, or maybe like if I want to simulate a sea, I can use a more bluish color for the ground. So you can simulate many different situations. Now, if you place the sun below the horizon, that's going to be a night scene. If you push it slightly up, it's going to be a sunset, or, well, dusk, dawn, something like that. So also you can create a night scene if you decrease the intensity of the sun, and you can change the color of the sun and also of the sky, so that you can create more like of a night scene, something more something darker and more bluish, more colder effect. And also there you can change the horizon blur. You can see how it's gonna affect. It's gonna look like more foggy, instead of having a really sharp line to represent the horizon. You can have something more blurred, which is gonna be more like atmospheric. And also you can change the height of the horizon. You can place it higher or lower. So you have many parameters here that you can play with and change the aspect of the rendering. And, well, I'm just again continuing to play around. Now for the color tuning here, you can also drop down the saturation if it's too colored. So again, this is already more like a night scene than before, but you can also go black and white. And since we don't have other lights, you probably will see everything black and white if you don't have any other lights. And here we can work with tint, and this is how we can change a sunlight into a moonlight and a day sky into a night sky with procedural maps. There you go. Just find the correct color that you want, the correct tone. I think this could be nice with the blur of the horizon, and everything else looks fine. Now we also have a really important effect, which is called the fog, which is like an environmental effect that is going to create more atmospheric and suggestive renderings. Also, the sky has an intensity, so it participates to the global illumination, just like the image baselining. So you have sun intensity, and you have also the sky intensity. So you need to balance all those values, manage all those values, try all those values, test, experiment, and see what you can do here with the sun and sky system. You can see you can create many different situations. Also, if I want a bigger moon here, I can increase again the disk size and the disk intensity and the glow intensity. So I think it's going to be fine for now. And I can see also the artificial lights in the interior because I have decreased the intensity outside. Now you can also have a RAM preview here. So we can see here, we can test different renderings. Okay, so this is going to be our last rendering. And this is the day scene. Sorry, the night scene. The previous one was day scene, so I can compare them. and see how they look different. And when you stop the rendering, now let's stop the rendering. We can see that the interiors there are looking fine. We can now compare them. So this is the ROM player here, and you can say A and B, and you can compare two different renderings in vertical or horizontal. So it's used to compare the different renderings, whether you want to compare the lining or the materials or the render settings. And it's also giving you the information about renderings up there. It's going to tell you that the resolution and so on. So it's another render tool that you can use. Now that's the resolution right there. So if you want to change the proportions, the width and the height, we saw in the first scene that we used that it has a custom size. So you can use all these presets, or you can customize the size anywhere you want, and you can see those save frames are really handy because they're gonna show you what is gonna be inside the frame, what's gonna be outside. So especially if you work like with really wide screen situations or like vertical screens, well, you may want to have a look at the save frames. Now again, we talk about the settings here for the quality. So when we're ready, when we finish to create our rendering, our scattering, our terrain, and everything else, we are ready for the final render. You can just start to bump up those values to have a better quality. And also here in the environment, we can increase the samples quality, and we can add here a scene atmosphere like the fog. So if I select the fog into the maps, this is another procedural map. So same thing we did with the sky. We're gonna click and drag it and drop it in the slate material editor, and here we can customize it. So I'm gonna go for like some bluish tint again, some bluish color. And the most important parameters here are the distance and the height. Then you can use also maps if you want for the distance, the height, and everything else, but this is gonna be longer. I'm just gonna show you the effect. So you can see now it's a really concentrated fog and it's really low, so it's looking kind of a sea. And this is one effect that you can get if you want. But in this case, I'm just going to, you see, you cannot use interactive render. You need to run the rendering if you want to see this effect, so it needs to be in the final render. So I'm gonna increase the height and decrease the distance, and also change the color a little bit, make it a little bit darker. And let's run the rendering again and see the changes. So now it's gonna look, you see there, a little bit higher than before. And again, it's like a sea of fog, of smoke, mist. So I'm just gonna decrease the distance even more and increase the height and run another test. And let's see what's gonna change. There you go. Now the more we decrease the distance, the more we increase the height, the more we're gonna have that environmental look, kind of again like a foggy night or some really smoky pollution scene. So you can look like, you can make like horror movies setups or sci-fi. You know, fog is used a lot in movies to hide what's behind. So can be used if you don't have a really large scene to optimize your scene to create smaller scenes and to hide like a simple background with a fog. So you just need to balance again the effect as usual and find the correct balance for that. So that's the camera there, and placed inside my scene, so I can always go back to the physical camera inside. There you go, this is physical camera 001. I can use also the lights to work with cameras. And when you work with cameras gonna have like a different exposure depending on how you set up those. So we're gonna talk about cameras later on, but just remember that also here with pressing Ctrl C, you can create a camera in the view that you are, and you can position the camera, just moving the camera inside whatever view and framing your scene. So right now we are inside the physical camera. When you do Ctrl C, it's going to create a camera right on the spot. Otherwise, you can create cameras in the camera panel. And you see you can navigate really similarly to what you do with the standard perspective. So you have kind of a zoom, a pan, you can move back and forward, and you can increase and decrease the field of view. You can orbit around. Now, field of view also is really important parameter of the camera. So if you want other parameters, you just go in the physical camera, select it, and then you can see here all the different parameters. Another important part is the target. Just like the light, we can point our camera in a precise position. And then we can choose presets for the lenses. Lenses are going to be like different types, so that you can also get different effects when you use a lens effect. And again, here you have the field of view or FOV. We have the zoom. So if you do a really extreme zoom and field of view, it's gonna have like some really strange thing happening. And then you have aperture. Aperture is really important for the light. So the more you open the shutter, the more light will get in. So these are all parameters we're gonna see in the next video. Just want to show you the exposure part. So you can see that now I'm using the camera. I'm saying physical camera exposure control. So instead of using the standard exposure, I'm gonna use the settings that I will set up in the camera. And I can always run a render preview to see if everything is going fine, process background and environment maps. And again, now I can change the exposure by changing the parameters that I find in the camera. One of these parameters is aperture. So the more I decrease aperture, the more light will get inside. The f-stop value. And then I have shutter speed and the ISO and the standard EV, which is the exposure. So I can also use simple exposure right here. So I can either adjust the exposure by changing the target exposure, all manual ISO, or I can also use f-stops and shutter speed. And also here I can enable vignetting, which is another realistic effect, and work with the temperature, with the degrees. So if I want a warmer look or a colder look. And again, we have a bunch of other parameters here in the camera, but we're just going to talk about the most important ones. So another way you can create a camera is go to create camera, and of course you can create also cameras like for Corona or for V-Ray. So each render engine has its own physical camera basically. But if you want to create also here a target camera, we can create a target camera. We can create a free camera. So target camera is like a simpler way you can create camera. So if you want to work more with like photographic settings, I suggest you use the physical camera. Target camera is easier to use, but in that case you cannot work with parameters like shutter speed or f-stops. You only have the lenses presets, the field of view, and other, you see the target and other stuff here. But again, if you want more advanced setup, more advanced features, you should use the physical camera. And the physical camera, remember, is gonna also affect the exposure. So that's the main difference. But we're gonna continue in the next video.